So before we begin the Mishnah today, the final Mishnayot of the third chapter of Avot that we will get to, I actually wanted to take the opportunity because I'm here alone tonight, to share something personal with you about Yom Kippur as well. Obviously, since 1973, the Yom Kippur took on another level of meaning for the Jewish people throughout the world following the Yom Kippur War. And when the sirens go off and buses show up at the synagogues and just pick up, people, fill up the buses and to go save the country, which is under threat, that obviously gives another meaning to the prayers of Yom Kippur, of life and death. And with the amount of losses on Yom Kippur as well, for many, many families in Israel, Yom Kippur is a day which has extra meaning. It's a day that they lost their loved ones. It's a day when they're young. In some cases, someone was telling me today a personal story. He was a rabbi that I met today, who is the president of the Mizrahi movement today, Rabbi Yechiel Wasserman. I was in a meeting with him today, and he told me that he was pulled out of a burning tank, um, critically wounded, and his officer of the tank, someone who he had been at his wedding just 4 days before, newly married, and he saw him disappear in front of his eyes, is how he put it, to never be seen again. So Yom Kippur has this element of really of life and death and being written in the book of life, and that we pray for. So I also wanted to take the opportunity following Yom Kippur just now, um, to share something personal from my own family, about the Yom Kippur War, something that actually just came up just before Yom Kippur. So I'd like to share a picture with you. Can see here, 1 second. Um, yes, can you see this picture? Okay, so
Yes, yes.
yeah. So this picture is obviously we see in front of us a woman in very, very deep agony, and she is on the gravestone here, of her son. And this picture was a picture that was shared just a few days before Yom Kippur by the National Library of Israel. And it was a picture that was depicted as showing the agony of the nation. You see the mourn in her face, and and what it means for a mother to lose her son. This was this picture that was chosen sort of as a national picture of mourning, just last week, is a picture of my wife's grandmother, who we see here in the picture. And the gravestone is the gravestone of my wife's uncle, who she never knew, because she was born 7 years afterwards. And the story of this soldier, when you see this mother who has lost her son, my wife's grandmother. Um, so he um, was called in. He came. He actually volunteered because he wasn't physically able, and they told him not to go in. But he, like many others, said, "This is about my country." So he went down and he joined a tank down in the Suez Canal, and they were fired upon by the Egyptians. And what happened was that the tank caught on fire, and he was killed. But what happened was that he actually um, was missing in action for many months, and um, no one and the Naomi, who we see here, sat around the radio and waited for someone to knock on the door for the next several months, for over half a year, until finally they were able to go beyond there. After the war was over, they, in cooperation with the Egyptian army and the United Nations, went in to look for the bodies, and finally they were able to find the tank, and they were able to find the body and bring only over half a year later, when it was just before Pesach, that they finally brought Yoram Tzadok and brought him to Har Herzl, which is the national monument in Jerusalem, and buried him together with all the other many soldiers who fell in action. And the grandmother that my wife grew up with was never the same person again following this. But to backtrack, to go beyond this, this was sort of, this was, you know, the pinnacle of grief that started much earlier. Because the same woman that we see here, she lost a young daughter as a baby, as an infant, during the Independence War in 1948. And in 1938, they walked for over a year from Yemen to then Palestine, to the Holy Land, and she lost a baby on the way as well. So you see this personal story of a woman's sacrifice for the land of Israel, for the people of Israel, and the amount of grief and mourning that she has. And she finally has an older son, her pride, who makes it into, who's in his 20s at the time, and he disappears. And for her, that was a break that could never be fixed again. And the amount of mourning that is there in the family. So they built a synagogue in his name in a Yemenite moshav next to Beit Shemesh. Um, um, and the Beit Knesset, the shul, is named after him. And every year on Yom HaZikaron, the day before Yom Ha'atzmaut, we all go there. The entire family gathers around for a special prayer. We stand there when the siren goes off on Yom HaZikaron, on the day of mourning, of national mourning in Israel, and we remember. But I think that when you picture Israel today, for me, especially on Yom Kippur, to see, this was what I had. This picture was I was what I had in mind during the prayer of Yom Kippur throughout the day, when I led the services, and also to pray to Hashem to say, look how much we have gone through as a nation. Look how much pain we have gone through um, as a nation. It's not something that we can even, I think, imagine of what it is to go through a life like that. And it's in the merit of these people that we live in, that we have the state of Israel today, that we have a nation, that we have, um, a thriving nation despite all of the challenges today. So this picture was something that my wife's family never even knew existed until just last week, when it came out in the National Library of Israel. So it's very moving, of course, for my father-in-law to see this picture of his mother, and to realize that it had been chosen by the National Library of Israel as the picture that depicted this moment of Yom Kippur for the nation. So I wanted to share that with you. I felt it was something that was very special, and that I would like to share with you just following Yom Kippur, before we start the Mishnah, and to realize how many levels, we are as a people, that keep us together. And some are happy moments, and some, unfortunately, are this, very, very deep moving agony that we share, and that bond us together beyond all differences. And that, Bezrat Hashem, our hope and our prayers are, as well on Yom Kippur, is praying that, there's something so deep that bonds us together, that sometimes we forget it. And hopefully we won't need only moments of agony to remind us of that. So I wanted to share that with you tonight before, and we will go into the Mishnah that we will learn as well. I'm sorry for the light here; it's really not so good.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can. Yeah, I think the light. This is a bit better, right? I think so. I hope so. Okay, so we're gonna go into the last two Mishnayot of chapter 3 of Avot. Let me open and share with you. So, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah um, it's a name that we know from the Haggadah of Pesach, actually. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was one of the sages who lived at a very critical point in which um, after the destruction of the temple, the sages are regathering and trying to create an understanding and a system of Torah shel Baal Peh, of the oral Torah, and how to pass it on, how to survive without the spiritual center of the temple. We've spoken about this before, but Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he was one of the most prominent rabbis who is in this transitional period when the sages are resetting themselves and resetting the spiritual center from Jerusalem to Yavne, where the Romans allowed them to do that. They exiled all of the sages from the area of Judea. They allowed them, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who we mentioned before, settle and restart the spiritual center, you can say that was the first Bet Midrash in a sense, that was when they first began the oral Torah and how to, and also the ethical code and setting the priorities of the ethical code, which is what this Mishnah is coming to say. So we have a very long list here that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah puts together, basically saying, how do we prioritize in life our moral codes and ethics? What comes first? And also, I would say it's also a word of caution against extremism and against over-focusing on one thing and then forgetting something else. Because many times there's a tendency in which something can be so important to us. However, we forget something else along the way when we're over-focused on one thing. Glenn, can you read it? Would you like to read out the Mishnah for us?
Sure. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said, where there is no Torah, there is no right conduct. Where there is no right conduct, there is no Torah. Where there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. Where there is no fear of God, there is no wisdom. Where there is no understanding, there is no knowledge. Where there is no knowledge, there is no understanding. Where there is no bread, there is no Torah. Where there is no Torah, there is no bread. He used to say, one whose wisdom exceeds his deeds. To what may he be compared? To a tree whose branches are numerous, but whose roots are few, so that when the wind comes, it uproots it and overturns it. As it is said, he should be like a bush in the desert, which does not sense the coming of good. It is set in the scorched places of the wilderness, in the barren land without inhabitant. But one whose deeds exceeds his wisdom, to what may he be compared? To a tree whose branches are few, but roots are many, so that even if all the winds in the world come and blow upon it, they cannot move it out of its place. As it is said, he shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its roots by a stream. Its leaves are ever fresh. It has no care in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit.
Okay, thank you. So it's a very long Mishnah, and what I'd like to try to do is to see the contrast that we have here in the Mishnah. And I think one of the some of these are quite famous and are used today, even in regular Hebrew language, as examples or as sayings of wisdom. But we can see if we, what is the contrast, and also doesn't make sense. So, what does it say here? It says, where there is no Torah, there is no right conduct. And derech eretz, which is the word in Hebrew, derech eretz is a very famous term, also used in Hebrew today, not only in the Talmudic scriptures or language. Derech eretz means basically to be a mensch, right? Basically means to be a person that has moral conduct. And it's a very, I would say, it's actually not so simple, right? But the first thing, what is he telling us? He's telling us without Torah, there is no right conduct. In other words, if someone says, I will do okay by myself, and I will set my own code of moral conduct, one should be wary about that, because he says we actually have the Torah, which tells us the moral conduct and how it should be set. And having the godly wisdom of the Torah means that if we learn that the Torah is actually creating a sense of what is moral conduct and what we should follow. And I think that we see many times that if we talk about proper balances, then many ideologies that start off with a very nice idea end up in a very extreme place with the same ideologies that we're supposed to care for the people. If you take a very simple example, right, then you have democracy is a very beautiful idea. But when does democracy become so extreme that in the name of democracy, you're not allowing freedom even, or certain opinions because you feel that they are non-democratic? We can talk about socialism, and you could talk about communism, which is supposed to care for the people, but then you end up in a situation in which the very system that is supposed to care for the people ends up imposing itself forcefully upon the people, and etc., etc. You can have many beautiful ideas that are supposed to be set moral conduct. I think also when we look at today, when you have, for example, the Human Rights Declaration that was set by the United Nations, it was set following the disaster of the modern world, saying we know what moral conduct is. We don't need to have it set in or engraved, and we know better than the religious morals that were there before. We're going to create something better than that. And it was only after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, and after the disaster of the Second World War and the First World War, and the millions that were killed under these modern ideologies of nationalism, of communism, that you ended up in a situation in which you go back to say, well, we actually need to set some sort of Torah. We have to set some sort of moral code of what is and what is not moral conduct. What are the human rights that should be protected? So maybe there was this notion that we don't really need that. We're moral people. Maybe we don't have to set it and then you end up in a situation in which, following the first words of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, what he's saying here is you actually have Torah, that you need to have. Torah means you have to have a direction. You have to have laws that are in place, because without them you won't have a true sense of morality in the world. However, the opposite is also true. If you don't have a moral code of acting, then you will not have Torah as well. In other words, I think it's a word of caution that he's setting here and saying, be careful, because you can be so over-focused in learning Torah itself that you forget how to act towards other people. And just to give an extreme example, which is not representative at all, but how can, in the name of keeping Shabbat, can you go and, for example, attack people who are driving on Shabbat, like some extremists do in the name of the Torah, right? And I say extremists because they're not norm, they're not representative, but I'm giving an extreme example in which when someone in the name of the Shabbat actually desecrates God's name, because what are you doing? You're attacking someone else because of your feeling of the Shabbat. But what are you doing? You represent, right, the Torah as a religious person, as someone who's keeping the Shabbat, and you don't have derech eretz. You don't know how to act towards someone else. You can say in the name of many things. You can talk about, someone in the name of religion can say many things, and hurt other people, because you're saying this is the right thing to do. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, you know what? If you don't know how to be a mensch, then you don't have Torah at all. If you don't know how to act as proper conduct towards other people, you have something lacking in your Torah. So it's a very strong statement. And as I said, he's setting the priorities of moral code of conduct of the Jewish people and how we should, and to make sure that we always have the balance. So he's saying both of them are right. If you don't think that you're going to be a moral person if you don't set proper laws of moral conduct. But don't think that you have the proper Torah if you don't have the moral conduct as well. And he goes on, and we'll see two contrasting, and as we go through this, we're going to see throughout the Mishnah contrasting ideas. So here's and explain why we need to practice them at all times. So the next example that he gives, he says, where there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. Where there is no fear in general. In other words, he depicts a world in which people, there's no wisdom, and no one is sharing wisdom. So in a world in which there's no fear whatsoever, that is, that what does fear mean? That I have a system, right? Such, one of the Noahide laws of the 7 basic laws given to human kind is to have a system in which you have law, in which you have something that you're fearful of. I think also it runs back to the idea that we saw in the previous example, that you don't think that we as humans will be okay without setting some sort of system to uphold it. And in this case, he's also talking about an awe of God. You have this philosophical question, right? If you throw a group of people, 20 people onto an island, right? Will they end up being moral to one another? What is the natural state of a human being? Is it one in which we're kind to one another, in which we care, or is it one of survival? And right, the book, right, Lord of the Flies, for example, brings forward this question, and I think has a very pessimistic look upon this, in which you're saying if you take people and just put them together, then you have no, and especially if they're youngsters, but in general, then people will become animalistic in their survival mode. And if you don't have something which is creating a system of keeping the law, then you will lose, right? Then you won't have people, the wisdom will not come forth. So, but he also says the opposite as well, that, right, if you have no wisdom, then you won't have fear. But if you have no fear, then there'll be no wisdom as well. So it goes both ways. So don't think that you're so smart that you don't need that fear, but don't think that just having fear itself is enough, because then you won't have any sharing of wisdom either between people. So both of them, as we saw before, they complement one another. And we go forward to the next exam. Im en bina and dat. Where there's no understanding, there is no knowledge. Anyone, how do we, what is the difference between understanding and knowledge?
Do you mean the different?
Yes. What would be,
The
what is
difference?
it? Yes.
Yeah, I need an English word for in selvfølge. It's not 100% right. If you learn to know and maybe you not understand what's the knowledge is and what it's mean, what the point is. So you have to have words and the knowledge explained.
Yes, thank you. Glenn, did you want to add something?
Well, I would say that knowledge is the application of understanding.
And what is,
Excuse me?
and what is the danger of having only understanding or only knowledge?
Well, if you have a theoretical understanding of something and you don't know how it's to be applied, then you apply it incorrectly. In contrast, if you only have practical application but no understanding of why, it's not complete.
In a way, I think just listening to both of you, I think it really connects to what we saw before also in terms of wisdom, that we have wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, but the wisdom is connecting to having right, it's contrasted with fear. Here we have understanding and knowledge. And as you're saying, if you go, you can go to the university for, right, for 40 years, but there's no application of that, and I would say there's no connection. In other words, also connected to not application. You use the word application, which I agree, and it's interesting that the root word of dat in Hebrew is also connected to intimacy. The first time that the word knowledge is used, that the word dat is used in the Torah, is when it says that Adam knew his wife Eve. What does it mean to know your wife? Well, there's many things you can know about her, but knowing someone intimately means I have a very deep understanding or connection. And that's the difference between, I think, like you're saying, between what is theoretical and being connected to something. The danger of knowledge is that you can know so much, but you're not connecting it to life itself and to the people surrounding you. And on the other hand, you can have knowledge, right? But if you don't have a deeper understanding, then that could be almost foolish because, right, you lose, right? You don't have the theoretical understanding and you think that you do. So again, these two complement each other very wisely, I would say, but also it's a word of caution, right? Make sure that when you learn something in depth, that you manage to connect it to everyday life, to apply it to everyday life, be it electricity, right? Or be it human connections. And what we understand, you can have a great psychologist. You can have, I remember someone once gave the example that he said, there was a marriage counselor, and this marriage counselor was known as the top expert. And he said the reason why is because he got divorced 4 times. So he knew best how it was to get divorced. So in other words, this idea of he might have the best knowledge, right? Or maybe the best understanding about marriage, and he knows all the theoretical, you know, uh, psychology about marriage, but he doesn't know how to apply it to his day-to-day life because obviously it didn't work, or he would say it worked 4 times. So, in that sense, I think that's a good example of understanding and knowledge, right? That we need the two of them to complement one another. The next one I think is quite easy, right? Where there is no bread, there is no Torah. How do we understand this? Barbara, you've been silent all since you arrived. Where there's no bread, there's no bread, there's no Torah. There's no Torah, there is no bread. You're muted.
If it is no bread, maybe you are hungry, you can't learn Torah.
Yes, it's right. In other words, someone can think that the Torah provides sustenance and the Torah provides everything that we need. But at the end of the
Yes.
day, we need a livelihood. We need to have a way to put bread on the table, right?
I don't hear you very well. I don't know about the others. It's something.
Yeah, we'll do my best. I can't really.
It's double sound.
So maybe the others have to mute. Everyone else is muted. I don't know.
It was not like this before.
So maybe you just have to mute yourself. Sorry. Okay. I hope it's better now. But like Barbara was saying, right? You can have this great idea, right? The Torah is everything that we need. It's God's present to us. But at the end of the day, we live in a world in which we have to care. We have to care for ourselves, for our families. We have to make sure there's bread on the table. And also, having that also, I think, brings us down to earth, as they say in English, brings us down to the level of having to work, which is a blessing. And working can be a curse, but it can also be a blessing that we're not just philosophical, that we actually have to do something um, to, to build something, to make the world better, right? To work for something. So in that sense, don't think that you will just survive that God did not create us angels. He could have created us like the angels, in which we have no physical needs. But it's the advantage that we have that we're not angels, that we can actually do something productive and build this world and do many positive things through the work that we do. But on the other hand, it's obvious that if we're so overwhelmed that we lose we lose sense of the priorities of life, of interaction, of learning, of family, that you're working, so much that you come home dead like an animal, right? Like and you just and then all you're doing in your whole life is working and working, or too much, and you have no balance and you have no spirituality, then that obviously is not good either. So I think in this case is obvious, and also I think there's also something to be said that we saw elsewhere in Pirkei Avot, that it's actually something that if someone wants to learn Torah, it's beautiful, but it's also something that we shouldn't do for free, or that we shouldn't be paid actually to do. It's something that our spiritual life should be something which is holy, and that is complementing the physical life and the work that we are doing as well. So then we have this very beautiful analogy that he gives, in which he says, based on what we have seen until now. He says, one whose wisdom exceeds his deeds, to what may he be compared? To a tree whose branches are numerous, but whose roots are few. In other words, you see this beautiful tree, but we forget that when we're looking at a tree, we don't see what's under the ground. And many times what we can see is superficial. In this case, he's saying this is the wisdom. You might see someone who's such a wise person and has so many beautiful things and wise things to share, but he actually doesn't do anything with them. So in a sense, what we do is when we follow action, when we do deeds in this world, what are we doing? We are taking our roots and making them grow deeper into the ground. The wisdom itself doesn't make deeper roots, is what he's saying here. Rather, the deeds themselves, the actions that we do, following the way that we act, going back to what he was saying about being moral people, being a mensch to one another, being a person of kindness, all of these things are taking the wisdom that we have and creating roots. So someone whose wisdom, he's so involved in his wisdom that he's detached from the deeds themselves. So you see this beautiful tree and it has great branches, but at the end, what happens is that, this wind comes by and just uproots the tree, and all of the life and all of the wisdom becomes worthless because it's like a bush in the desert. Why? Because you have these bushes in the desert that the wind take them from place to place, and they have no roots themselves. The roots aren't deep, they don't have water. So the water itself is the Torah. The roots themselves are the deeds and the actions that we do, and it brings us, and that's what creates a deep, something which is enrooted. And therefore he says the opposite. But one whose deeds exceed the wisdom, right? So you might see this tree. The tree itself doesn't look so rich. And you might see this person and you say, where's his wisdom? He's so involved in this community, so involved with people. Why isn't he spending so much time? I think it's something that we as the rabbis long for the days in the yeshiva, when we used to have many hours a day just to delve into wisdom. And for us, it's the deepest pleasure I think that we have, to be able to focus and learn on the Torah. But then you come to community and you get so involved in the community that you ask yourself, wait, but I came here as a rabbi, when do I have time to actually learn Torah? What the Mishnah here is saying, that what is the answer? Is that these are the roots. This is what is actually making the world a better place, is the action that you take with people, the interaction that you have with the people. And maybe the branches are not so beautiful, but the roots are many, and no wind can actually come and turn it over. It's compared to a tree that is planted by the waters, sending forth its roots by stream. It does not sense the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It does not care. It has no care in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. So it's interesting that sometimes you can have a tree which has so many branches, but you see at the end of the day, it doesn't really have a lot of fruit on it. Whereas you can have a much smaller tree, and the fruit, right? You can have a tree which has the roots are so deep. At the end of the day, what we know, that the nutrition that causes the amount of fruit on the tree comes from the water, comes from the roots, comes from the earth, doesn't come from the branches themselves. So we might look at a tree and see it's very small, but at the end of the day, we'll see that a small apple tree can have 20 times the amount of apples that a huge apple tree that grows nothing, depending on the roots. So putting this Mishnah all together, I think the idea is that if you have a proper balance in life between the moral conduct and the action, between the knowledge and the understanding and the application of it, between what are my roots in life and I am enrooted in, and then what are the branches and where am I spreading my branches to? So the proper balance, at the end of the day, I should have no worries, because I will see that many fruits will come out of the actions that I'm actually taking. So we now have just the last Mishnah of chapter 3, and it's actually not so simple. So I'm just gonna read it out because I don't think we're gonna have a chance to go into it in depth. But Rabbi Eliezer Chizma, the son of Chizma, said, the laws of mixed bird offerings and the key to the calculation of menstruation days, these are the body of the halacha. In other words, we won't get into the examples themselves. But what he's saying is that you have many, many complicated laws in the Torah. And sometimes if you get so caught up in them that you think they're just philosophical and they're not meaningful. But the calculation of the equinoxes and gematria are the deserts of wisdom. In other words, many times, following the previous Mishnah, you can have gems of wisdom that you can get very excited about, and you can start counting these different calculations, and which are, which many, rabbis, when you learn them, you can get excited about them. But Rabbi Eliezer is saying, don't forget the boring stuff, because that's actually the application, using the word that Glenn used before, of the actual laws themselves. So I realized it's not the Mishnah, we won't themselves, but what he's saying is what is sometimes very boring and very complicated law can sometimes be the ones that people need most to know when they have a situation in life that they need you to be able to answer to and to reply to. And all of the wisdom that you might give the greatest speech in the world on Yom Kippur and Kol Nidrei, and everyone can really be connected to, that's great. But you also have to know the halakha in order to be able to guide people in how to live their lives in the daily practice. So this Mishnah complements in my opinion the previous Mishnah, saying make sure that you have the proper balance between what is philosophical, what is wisdom, what is understanding, and then what is the actual daily life. And if you're so involved in the Torah that you forget how to be a mensch, or on the opposite side, you're so into the application of the laws that you forget the wisdom behind them, then you can be and you can lose the proper balance in life. So I think that the summary of this chapter that we've been learning now for many weeks now, we're now finishing the 18th Mishnah of this chapter, really brings forward this how to have a delicate balance in life between what is wisdom and what is life itself, what is prayer and what is interaction with other people, and how to be a good person at the end of the day is how to balance all of this together. So next, just to sum up, next week will be Sukkot, so we won't have a shiur. So I want to wish everyone a wonderful Chag, a Chag Sameach to you all, and we'll see each other B'ezrat Hashem in 2 weeks. And for those who missed the discussion at the beginning, so we will have probably a bit of a change in the program itself, but if so, I will send out an email on it, and I will send the program out as well. If we begin something a bit different to try to have more interactive learning, but also what I heard here from the participants at the beginning of the shiur is that it's to have it tonight. You only got me. I'm very sorry for that. I hope it was okay. I also heard that you enjoy the interaction between the different rabbis. So I will bring that to the attention of the rabbis as well, that we have positive reinforcement from our talmidim, from our students. So thank you very much for that. And Chag Sameach to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
And
you
see
so much.
תודה רבה.
Chag Sameach.
Okay, bye.